The sun had just begun its slow crawl over the dense pine forest surrounding Natchez, Mississippi. The morning mist clung stubbornly to the fields, blurring the edges of the century-old oak trees that lined the gravel roads. Birds sang cautiously, as though the forest itself had learned to tread lightly in a town that had been haunted by secrets for years. It was June 15th, 1992, and 17-year-old Holly Mackenzie had left her small brick house on Oak Street with her worn backpack slung over one shoulder. She was a tall, willowy girl with chestnut hair that caught the sunlight, freckles across her nose, and eyes that held a mix of curiosity and mischief. Holly was meticulous, responsible, and quiet, a high school junior with dreams of leaving Natchez behind one day, going to college, seeing the world beyond the Mississippi Delta. She waved goodbye to her younger brother, Tommy, who was still rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Don't be late for your history class," he called, still in his pajamas. "I won't," Holly replied with a smile, locking the front door behind her. That would be the last time Tommy saw her. The streets of Natchez were unusually empty that morning, the kind of silence that makes the creak of a wooden fence sound like thunder. Holly's route to school took her past the old town square, where shutters banged gently in the morning breeze, past the small-town bakery where the smell of fresh bread usually drifted, and along the banks of the Mississippi River, whose waters shimmered under the first rays of sunlight. But somewhere along the route, Holly vanished. No one saw her leave. No one saw her arrive. The morning that had begun so normally now carried a palpable tension, one that settled over the town like a fog. At Natchez High School, the day went on as usual at first. Teachers called out names. Students shuffled between classrooms. Lockers clanged. Holly's absence was initially dismissed as a simple mistake. Late to class, perhaps had an errand, maybe slept in. But when the second bell rang and then the third, and Holly did not appear, concern began to ripple. Her friends whispered in the hallways, anxious and confused. By midday, the principal, Margaret Simmons, called Holly's home. The phone rang and rang, unanswered. Simmons' voice trembled slightly when she finally spoke to Tommy, who confirmed that Holly had left for school hours earlier but had not arrived. By late afternoon, Sheriff Carl Jennings was involved. Natchez wasn't a big town. The population barely crossed 20,000, and cases like this were rare enough that they shook the entire community. Jennings, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with a graying mustache and decades of local experience, arrived at the Mackenzie residence. He could feel the weight in the air, thick and suffocating, as he knocked gently on the door. Holly's mother, Linda Mackenzie, opened it with trembling hands. Her hair was streaked with gray despite being only 45. Her eyes were red from crying. "She's not home," Linda said before Jennings even spoke. "I don't know where she is." "Ma'am, we'll find her," Jennings assured, though the knot in his stomach said otherwise. The sheriff's office began canvassing the streets immediately. Neighbors were questioned. Bus drivers, local shopkeepers, everyone who might have seen a teenage girl with a backpack moving along Oak Street. The answers were frustratingly consistent. No one had seen Holly. By evening, the town was on edge. Word of Holly's disappearance traveled fast, like wildfire fanning out from dry brush. Families locked doors a little tighter. Parents whispered to their children. Even the sun seemed reluctant to set over the town, its golden light stretching long shadows across empty streets. Somewhere near the edge of the pine forest, Holly's backpack was found, discarded in the tall grass beside a narrow dirt path. Inside were her notebooks, neatly stacked, and her favorite pen lying atop her homework. Nothing else appeared disturbed. No signs of a struggle, no immediate evidence pointing to who might have taken her. Detectives arrived from the state police to assist. Detective Evelyn Carter, known for her meticulous attention to detail and calm demeanor, examined the area, crouching low to inspect the grass for footprints. She noticed something unsettling. Faint tire tracks nearby, almost hidden by the overgrowth, as though a vehicle had passed just before the backpack was left. "They're trying to cover their tracks," Carter muttered under her breath. Meanwhile, townspeople had gathered near the town square. Mothers clutched children. Fathers paced along the streets, hands over their faces. Rumors began circulating. Some whispered that Holly had run away, tired of small-town life. Others feared something far worse, Abduction. The night brought no answers. Just the river's distant murmur, the rustle of pine needles, and a town holding its collective breath. Holly Mackenzie had disappeared, and nothing in Natchez would ever feel the same again. Little did anyone know that this was only the beginning. What started as a single missing person case would grow into a decades-long mystery, one that would haunt the small town for 27 years, challenging the community's trust, shaking families to their core, and leaving scars that never fully healed. But the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because 27 years later, a lead would emerge that no one in Natchez could have anticipated. And when the truth came to light, it would stun the entire town. The night of Holly's disappearance stretched long into darkness. The quiet of Natchez broken only by the distant hum of crickets and the occasional bark of a dog. In the Mackenzie home, the air was thick with tension, grief, and disbelief. Holly's mother, Linda, sat in the dim kitchen light, staring at the empty chair at the table where Holly had breakfasted that morning. Her fingers trembled as she clutched a mug of cold coffee, the steam long gone. She wouldn't just leave, she whispered. She never would. Tommy, Holly's younger brother, leaned against the wall, staring at the floor. His eyes were wide and scared, the innocence of his 13 years shattered by a fear he couldn't yet name. "Mom, maybe she's at Jenny's house?" he offered, his voice small and fragile. Linda shook her head slowly. "I called. She's not there. Tommy, she's not coming home tonight." Sheriff Carl Jennings remained calm outwardly, but inside his stomach churned. He had dealt with missing teens before, but there was something different about Holly. Something that made him instinctively know this case would not be simple. The first official report was filed just before midnight. Officers went door to door, asking neighbors if they had seen Holly, if they had heard anything unusual. Most shook their heads. Others whispered about a strange car that had been seen near Oak Street the week before, a black sedan with tinted windows. The description was vague, the memory uncertain, but it planted the first seeds of worry. At the local diner, a few of Holly's classmates gathered around a booth, hushed voices and wide eyes betraying their fear. "She just vanished," one of them whispered, her voice quivering. "I saw her leave for school this morning." "No one saw her on the bus?" asked another. "No," the first girl replied. "It's like she disappeared." The rumor mill began to churn. Speculation spread rapidly across town. Did Holly run away? Was she hiding something? Or had something far darker taken place? The uncertainty gnawed at the townspeople, creating a tense atmosphere that thickened with every passing hour. By the following morning, media had arrived. A single camera crew from a Jackson station set up near Oak Street, filming the quiet streets, the worried neighbors, and the Mackenzie home. Reporters asked the same questions over and over, questions that had no answers yet. Holly's mother stood on the porch as the camera light shone, holding a photograph of her daughter, a smile frozen in time, full of promise and warmth. "Please," she said softly, voice shaking, "if anyone knows anything, help us. Help me find my Holly." The plea echoed through the town and soon beyond. Flyers were printed and distributed, plastered to telephone poles, store windows, and school bulletin boards. Each flyer carried the same haunting message. Missing. Holly Mackenzie, 17. Last seen June 15, 1992. Detectives focused their attention on Holly's last known movements. They interviewed bus drivers, teachers, and neighbors, piecing together a timeline. Holly had left home at 7:15 a.m., seen by her younger brother, and was expected at school around 7:45 a.m. She never arrived. One neighbor, an elderly man named Harold Jennings, recalled seeing Holly walking along the gravel road near the river that morning, backpack slung over her shoulder, hair catching the sun. He remembered noting the quiet, almost eerie stillness of the morning. "It was like the world was holding its breath," Harold said later to investigators. "I watched her walk by, then I didn't see her again. Nothing. Not a sound. Not a bird. Just gone." Another neighbor reported seeing a dark-colored vehicle parked along a dirt path near Holly's route. The car's windows were tinted. The driver was never seen exiting. Nothing else about the vehicle could be recalled. No license plate, no markings. Sheriff Jennings assigned a special task force to search the surrounding area. Teams combed the nearby woods, the banks of the Mississippi River, abandoned houses, and empty lots. Dogs were brought in to follow Holly's scent, but by the time they arrived, the trail had long gone cold. As the days passed, the tension in Natchez grew unbearable. Parents became more protective, keeping children close and adjusting routines. Schools held assemblies warning students about stranger danger. Gossip became a persistent hum in the air, impossible to ignore. And then came the first break, though it wasn't the kind anyone hoped for. A jogger along the riverbank claimed to have seen a girl matching Holly's description getting into a car with an unknown man. The jogger's account was detailed enough to warrant further investigation. The car was a dark blue sedan mid-1980s, with noticeable rust spots along the rear bumper. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a baseball cap. The investigators followed the lead immediately, scouring car registrations in the area, interviewing men fitting the description, and questioning anyone who might have been near the river that day. Yet, each lead collapsed under scrutiny. Alibis checked out, sightings couldn't be confirmed, and the trail went cold. For Holly's family, every dead end was a knife twisting deeper. Each day that passed without news made the fear heavier. Her mother refused to sleep, sitting in the living room with the light on all night, the phone beside her. Each ring brought a spike of hope, then disappointment. "Every day I wake up thinking I'll see her walking to the door," Linda said to a reporter weeks later. And every day, I'm wrong. The town of Natchez, meanwhile, had entered a collective state of unease. The small population, tightly knit, now whispered about dangers previously unconsidered. Stranger abductions, once the stuff of distant news, were suddenly local nightmares. Parents questioned neighbors. Strangers were eyed with suspicion, and the innocence of the community was replaced by a pervasive anxiety. Despite extensive searches, interviews, and tip lines, Holly Mackenzie remained missing. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and the case became emblematic of fear itself. A bright, promising life snatched from a small town, leaving a void that no amount of speculation or investigation could fill. By the end of the first month, authorities issued a public alert across the state, hoping someone, somewhere, might come forward. Rewards were offered, meetings held, and yet, despite the relentless efforts of police and volunteers, Holly's disappearance defied explanation. The case became a specter that haunted Natchez. Every passing year added layers to the mystery, and as time stretched from months into years, the hope that Holly might be found alive waned. But the search for answers never truly ended. And as the calendar turned to 1993, a strange sense of foreboding settled over the town. Something about Holly's disappearance felt unfinished, unresolved, like a story waiting patiently for the final chapter to be written. Little did anyone know, nearly 27 years later, that chapter would finally arrive. And when it did, the arrest that shook Natchez would uncover secrets that some had spent decades trying to bury. The news of Holly Mackenzie's disappearance didn't just ripple through her family. It shook the very core of Natchez. In a town where everyone knew each other, where church potlucks and Friday night football were the heartbeat of community life, fear spread like wildfire. Parents clutched their children closer. Neighbors peered cautiously through curtains. Even teenagers, normally fearless in their small-town routines, found themselves glancing over their shoulders, their laughter muted. For the Mackenzies, every hour without Holly was an eternity. Linda Mackenzie refused to leave her home, spending nights staring out the window at the quiet street where Holly had vanished. She replayed the morning in her mind endlessly. The way Holly had waved goodbye, the sound of the door closing, the sunlight catching her hair. It was normal, ordinary, safe, until it wasn't. Tommy, only 13, retreated into himself. School became unbearable. He couldn't focus, couldn't participate in sports, couldn't find comfort in the routines that once made life manageable. Friends tried to console him, but he felt a profound isolation, as if a part of his soul had been wrenched away with his sister. Holly's father, James Mackenzie, a man of broad shoulders and calloused hands from years working in the lumber mills, took to patrolling the neighborhood each night, flashlight in hand, scanning the woods and streets for any sign of his daughter. Exhaustion etched deep lines into his face, but the determination in his eyes never waned. "I'll find her," he muttered to anyone who would listen, "no matter what it takes." The town rallied in ways small towns often do. Volunteers organized search parties, combing the dense pine forests, abandoned lots, and riverbanks. Churches opened their doors, offering support groups for families grappling with the unknown. The local high school held meetings to keep students informed and safe, distributing flyers and teaching awareness about stranger danger. But with every attempt to help came frustration. Leads evaporated as quickly as they were found. Sightings turned out to be mistaken identity. Suspicious vehicles turned out to belong to well-meaning neighbors. Weeks passed with nothing. Whispers began to grow louder. Questions once politely avoided now took center stage in conversations at the diner, the hardware store, and the church. "Did you hear about that car spotted near Holly's route?" A mother asked another as they stacked in goods for a charity drive. "I heard it was just a salesman," the second replied, though her voice trembled. "I don't know," said the first. "Something about this feels wrong." Fear mingled with suspicion. Natchez, once a place where doors were left unlocked and children played in the streets, now felt claustrophobic, as if the very town itself had turned against its residents. The media attention didn't help. Local stations ran segments on Holly's disappearance, showing photographs of her smiling face, her backpack, her freckled nose. Reporters camped outside Mackenzie's home, microphones thrust forward, demanding sound bites from a family still in shock. Holly's mother, desperate yet composed, became the voice of the community's anguish. She appeared on local radio and TV, pleading for information. "Please," she said, voice cracking. "If you know anything, no matter how small it seems, come forward. My daughter deserves to come home. She deserves to be safe." Her words reverberated across Natchez, sparking a mix of empathy and unease. Everyone wondered, if this could happen to Holly, could it happen to their children too? Friends of Holly's began holding vigils. Small groups of teenagers lit candles in her bedroom window, whispering prayers into the night air. Their hands shook, their voices low, as they clung to hope in the darkness. Even law enforcement felt the weight of the town's eyes. Sheriff Jennings and his deputies were now under scrutiny from every angle. Complaints surfaced, some claiming the search wasn't thorough enough, others demanding that federal agencies be brought in. The pressure was immense, but the sheriff remained steadfast. "This town is strong," he told reporters one afternoon. "We will not stop until we find Holly. I promise that." Yet the Mackenzies weren't the only ones haunted by Holly's absence. Teachers remembered her kindness and intelligence. Classmates remembered her laughter echoing through the hallways. Friends remembered her sitting quietly in the library, reading, sketching in notebooks. The disappearance of one teenager had rippled outward, affecting hundreds of lives, leaving a collective wound in the community's psyche. Over the following months, the case took a toll on everyone. Children were scared to go outside alone. Neighborhood watch programs multiplied. Even the town's annual festival, usually a source of pride and joy, felt subdued. Holly's photograph was displayed at the entrance, a constant reminder of a life interrupted. As time went on, hope mingled with despair. Volunteers kept searching. Tips continued to arrive from near and far. Many falls, some promising, but all demanding attention. Each lead that ended in nothing was a fresh heartbreak for the Mackenzies. And yet, despite the frustration, one thing became clear. The community would not forget Holly. Her face, her smile, her absence. It became part of Natchez's identity. Conversations at dinner tables, whispers in grocery stores, and church sermons all carried a memory of the girl who vanished one summer morning. Little did they know, the truth about Holly's disappearance was not lost forever. It had been quietly lingering, buried under years of uncertainty, waiting for a moment when persistence, luck, and modern investigative techniques would finally bring it to light. And when that day came, decades later, the community that had held its breath for nearly 30 years would finally get answers. Answers that would stun Natchez in ways no one could have imagined. The initial weeks of the investigation were a whirlwind activity, but also a frustration. Sheriff Jennings and Detective Evelyn Carter knew that in small towns like Natchez, information was often as much a curse as a blessing. Everyone knew everyone, and gossip could cloud the truth as much as reveal it. Every lead had to be treated with caution, verified and re-verified, and yet the pressure was immense. The first suspect was a local man named Daryl Simmons, a loner in his mid-30s, with a reputation for strange behavior. He had been seen near Oak Street the morning Holly disappeared. Some children whispered that he often lingered near the schoolyard, watching students. His neighbors described him as quiet, but odd. Detectives brought him in for questioning. The small interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and fluorescent light, a place where time seemed to stretch and warp. Simmons sat slouched, arms crossed, eyes darting to the corners of the room. "Where were you on the morning of June 15th? Carter asked, voice calm but firm. "Out, walking," he replied, voice low, defensive. "I go for walks in the morning. That's all." They pressed further. Alibi after alibi was checked, and each held. Simmons' movements were confirmed by a neighbor who had seen him on his porch, and by a clerk at the corner store. Frustrated but relieved, detectives released him. Yet suspicion lingered. Small towns were breeding grounds for rumor, and by the third day, Daryl Simmons had become a cautionary tale whispered in diners and at bus stops. Some residents believed he was guilty despite the evidence. Others feared the real culprit was still out there, watching, waiting, and clever enough to avoid suspicion. Meanwhile, the task force turned its attention to the vehicle reported near the riverbank. A dark blue sedan, mid-1980s, rust spots on the rear bumper. Law enforcement ran every registration, every sale, every complaint that matched the description. They questioned men who owned similar cars, scouring local records for years-old purchases. One potential lead came from a mechanic who remembered repairing a dark blue sedan for a man matching description given by the jogger who had seen Holly. But when investigators tracked him down, he had moved to Jackson months prior and had a solid alibi for June 15th. Another lead pointed to a traveling salesman who had passed through Natchez that week. But again, nothing added up. Frustration mounted. Weeks turned into months. The press hounded the sheriff's office, demanding results. Local parents became more vigilant, and the streets grew quieter, almost tense, as the town itself held its breath. As the investigation progressed, the detectives began to uncover troubling information about Holly's social circles. Though nothing incriminating, she had been bright, well-liked, and mostly cautious. She occasionally spent time with a small group of friends outside of school, going to the library or walking along the river, but all friends confirmed her responsible nature. There were no arguments, no threats, no behavioral red flags. The detectives explored the idea of a runaway. They checked shelters in Jackson, New Orleans, and even as far as Memphis. Holly's picture was circulated statewide. Her friends and family held hope, posting flyers and speaking to community groups. Each tip was followed, each sighting checked, but every lead came up cold. The Mackenzies' anguish deepened with each dead end. Linda, exhausted from sleepless nights, often found herself sitting in Holly's room, running her fingers over her daughter's belongings, whispering encouragements into the silence. "Please, Holly, come home," she would say, over and over. "Please tell me you're okay." Community support was unwavering, yet increasingly tinged with fear. At the local high school, students walked in clusters, refusing to be alone. Teachers doubled their vigilance during breaks. Church congregations prayed for Holly daily. Candles lit in hope that her safe return was still possible. Yet, as the months turned into a year, the investigation faced more subtle challenges. Leads came in from people convinced they had seen Holly, but their descriptions often conflicted, making it impossible to know which, if any, were credible. A man in a neighboring county claimed she had been seen getting into a van with a man wearing a baseball cap. Another woman said she saw a girl matching Holly's description on a bus to Jackson, but the bus company had no records to support the claim. Detectives began to fear they had reached the edge of what modern investigation could achieve in 1992. Without concrete evidence, witnesses, DNA, or a body, the case was becoming a nightmare of ambiguity, leaving families and officers in perpetual limbo. In early 1993, an unusual tip came from a retiree named Margaret Holloway, who claimed she saw a teenager resembling Holly near an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts town. She remembered it vividly: the girl's chestnut hair, the worn backpack, But by the time police followed up, the building had been demolished. No trace remained. Each false lead carried an emotional toll. Officers who genuinely cared about Holly's well-being struggled with guilt and self-doubt. Did we miss something? They would ask themselves in quiet moments. Did someone out there know more than they were telling? By mid-1993, the case officially became a cold case in the eyes of local authorities. The initial flurry of activity had slowed, replaced by a painstaking monitoring of tips and occasional searches. State investigators kept files open, evidence cataloged meticulously, photographs preserved, and reports cross-checked, but with limited resources and time, the case slipped into the shadows. Natchez, meanwhile, never forgot Holly. Her absence left an invisible wound in the town. Parents reinforced their vigilance. Friends kept her memory alive, and every year, her name would surface in whispers or in anniversary reminders. Still, somewhere in the town's edges, in the woods, in the quiet streets where the sun dropped behind the pines, the truth lingered, silent, patient, waiting for the right moment, for technology, tenacity, and luck to finally shine a light into the darkness. And decades later, that light would finally arrive. The moment of revelation, the arrest that would shake Natchez to its core, was still many years away. But for now, the town, the family, and the investigators carried the weight of uncertainty, the gnawing fear that Holly Mackenzie's story might never have closure. A hidden truth waited, buried beneath years of missed sightings, false leads, and unanswered questions. And when it finally emerged, it would bring both relief and shock. The calm before the storm would end suddenly. The community would never see it coming. Years passed, and Holly Mackenzie's disappearance slowly slipped into the background of Natchez's collective memory, though the Mackenzies never stopped searching, never stopped hoping, never stopped believing that somehow she was still out there. By the late 1990s, the case had officially gone cold, but detectives who had worked it refused to close the file completely. They meticulously cataloged every photograph, every tip, every witness statement, preserving the evidence as if Holly's safe return depended on it, because, in a way, it did. The Mackenzie home became a shrine to memory. Holly's room remained untouched. Her books sat neatly on the shelves. Her favorite clothes were folded in drawers. The family kept a calendar, marking each year since June 15, 1992, with small notes of hope, little reminders that their daughter had lived, laughed, and been loved. By 2000, the world of investigation had shifted. Forensics had advanced, DNA analysis had become more precise, and cold cases across the country were suddenly being revisited with techniques unavailable in the early 1990s. Detectives Evelyn Carter and Carl Jennings knew that Holly's case could no longer rely solely on witness statements and circumstantial evidence. They needed physical proof, something that could withstand decades of doubt. In 2003, a tip came from an unexpected source. A retired trucker who remembered passing a blue sedan along a back road years ago, parked in a clearing near the river. He recalled the car because of the rust along its bumper and a small dent on the left side. He had mentioned it to police in 1992, but it had seemed inconsequential at the time. Now, with the benefit of hindsight and improved record-keeping, the detail took on new significance. Detectives began reviewing old evidence. Holly's backpack, preserved since it was found near the river, was examined under new forensic protocols. Fibers were compared to clothing from suspects. Hairs were analyzed with advanced DNA extraction techniques, revealing microscopic traces that had previously gone undetectable. Then came the breakthrough. A tiny fragment of material collected from Holly's backpack, long overlooked, matched a sample from a dark blue sedan that had been stored in impound records. The DNA connection was minimal, but it was a start. Further digging revealed a chilling pattern. The car had been owned in 1992 by Lance Whitfield, a local man in his mid-30s with a quiet, unassuming presence in the community. He had lived in Natchez at the time and worked as a delivery driver, giving him freedom to move around without attracting attention. Whitfield had a clean criminal record. No prior arrests, no known history of violent behavior. But when detectives dug deeper, inconsistencies emerged. His statements about his whereabouts in June 1992 were vague. Witnesses recalled seeing him near Holly's right around the time of her disappearance. Even more disturbing, He had recently purchased a small storage shed just outside of town, the keys of which he refused to let anyone inspect without legal compulsion. By 2005, Holly's case had attracted renewed attention from state authorities. Detectives began reviewing interviews conducted over a decade earlier, looking for discrepancies in Whitfield's alibis and cross-referencing them with new forensic evidence. The town buzzed quietly. People remember the old rumors about a man who watched the streets too closely, but no one had ever imagined he could be connected to Holly's disappearance. With each passing month, investigators collected small but significant pieces of evidence. A witness came forward, recalling that Whitfield had mentioned seeing a girl like Holly near the river that morning, casually, in a conversation with a friend, a remark long forgotten but now damning in context. Another tip suggested that Whitfield had been seen removing items from a storage shed late at night during the summer of 1992, though no evidence remained to confirm what, if anything, had been stored there. Forensic teams continued to analyze the fibers from Holly's backpack, eventually connecting them to a rare type of upholstery that matched the interior of Whitfield's vehicle. It was a painstaking process, each step measured, each sample handled with extreme care. By 2006, detectives had enough circumstantial and forensic evidence to justify a formal review. The case had lain dormant for 14 years, but it was no longer hopeless. Modern technology, combined with persistence and meticulous record-keeping, had brought the investigation to the brink of resolution. Natchez, which had grown accustomed to Holly's absence as an unspoken part life, was unaware that the shadow of truth was slowly emerging from the darkness. The Mackenzies, now years older, still held on to hope. Linda, though marked by grief, remained resolute. She spoke publicly at town meetings, at church gatherings, and to local press outlets, keeping Holly's memory alive and urging anyone with information to come forward. Her voice carried a mixture of sorrow and steel, a mother's determination that her daughter's story would not end in silence. Then, one crisp morning in early 2006, a new lead arrived that would shake the investigation to its core. A maintenance worker at a local property discovered a small, rusted container partially buried near a back road along the Mississippi River. Inside were items that, when analyzed, confirmed what investigators had feared and hoped simultaneously: a direct connection to Holly Mackenzie. Detectives Carter and Jennings knew instantly that the decades-long search had finally reached a critical point. Evidence that had remained hidden for years was now concrete, undeniable. The ColdCase files, once dusty and silent, now pulsed with possibility. And with that evidence in hand, the wheels of justice began to turn again. The town of Natchez, unaware of the imminent revelation, continued its routines, unknowingly standing on the precipice of a moment that would leave everyone reeling. Because soon, nearly 14 years after Holly vanished, the arrest would come, and it would stun Natchez in ways no one could have imagined. It was a humid morning in early June 2006 when the quiet streets of Natchez suddenly bristled with tension. Sheriff Carl Jennings and Detective Evelyn Carter, along with a specialized task force, arrived at a modest home on the outskirts of town. The address was familiar to a few investigators, but had been long overlooked in the shadow of countless false leads. Lance Whitfield, the quiet, unassuming man whose name had recently surfaced in connection with new forensic evidence, lived there. Whitfield, now in his late 40s, answered the door wearing a plain gray t-shirt and faded jeans. His expression was calm, almost indifferent, betraying none of the turmoil that had quietly surrounded him for years. He greeted the officers with a neutral nod. "Mr. Whitfield," Carter began, her voice measured but firm, "we have questions regarding the disappearance of Holly Mackenzie in 1992. Whitfield blinked, his jaw tightening. "I don't know anything about that," he said simply. "Sir, we have evidence linking you to items connected to Holly," Jennings interjected, gesturing toward the forensic reports in his hand. "We need to speak with you." The tension in the room was palpable. Whitfield's eyes flicked briefly to the door, then back to the detectives. He remained silent for several long seconds, his hands clasped together in front of him. Finally, without resistance, he allowed the officers to proceed with questioning and eventually to place him under arrest. Outside, Natchez remained unaware of the momentous event unfolding just beyond the pine trees. Traffic continued along Oak Street. Children played in backyards. But inside the sheriff's office, a storm had quietly erupted. An arrest that would shake the town to its core. During the interrogation, detectives confronted Whitfield with the evidence they had painstakingly gathered. Fibers matching Holly's backpack, witness statements recalling his movements, and inconsistencies in his alibi spanning the day of June 15, 1992. Whitfield's demeanor shifted subtly, though he continued to deny involvement, insisting he had nothing to do with it and had no recollection of Holly that day. Detective Carter remained patient, letting the silence stretch, giving Whitfield the weight of the room pressing down on him. Hours passed, and slowly, pieces of his story began to unravel under the scrutiny of relentless questioning. The breakthrough came when forensic teams discovered additional trace evidence during a search of Whitfield's property. Small items, long buried and forgotten, were linked conclusively to Holly. DNA tests confirmed the match. The evidence was irrefutable. Confronted with the weight of the proof, Whitfield's calm facade finally cracked. He admitted to being near Holly that morning and revealed chilling details about what had happened. The confession, though carefully recorded by detectives, was delivered in a monotone voice, void of emotion. Yet its implications sent shockwaves through the investigative team. Word of the arrest leaked quickly, and soon the news reached the heart of Natchez. Residents were stunned. The man who had lived quietly among them, unremarkable and seemingly harmless, had been hiding a dark secret for nearly 14 years. Families whispered in disbelief. Parents clutched their children, and the streets, once familiar and safe, felt suddenly alien. For the Mackenzies, the arrest was a mixture of relief, disbelief, and lingering sorrow. Linda, who had held on to hope for so long, finally allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism. "They found him," she whispered to her husband, tears streaming down her face. "They found him." But the reality of the situation was still sobering. Holly's body had never been recovered, and the details of her final moments were harrowing. While the arrest brought answers, it also reopened wounds, forcing the town to confront the depth of the crime that had haunted them for over a decade. Detectives ensured that the case would be thoroughly documented, that Whitfield would face justice for every aspect of his crime, and that Holly's memory would be honored through meticulous legal proceedings. Court dates were set, and the community braced itself for the trial that would finally reveal the full scope of the tragedy. Even as the arrest unfolded, the atmosphere in Natchez was electric. Long-held suspicions and rumors crystallized into reality. The town that had once whispered in uncertainty now faced undeniable truth. Residents who had grown accustomed to fear and speculation now confronted the chilling knowledge that one of their own had committed a crime that would ripple through decades. For the Mackenzies, the arrest marked the beginning of closure, though not the end of grief. Justice, delayed but now within reach, provided some comfort. The emotional scars remained, but the long-awaited answers brought a sense of peace that had seemed impossible for years. And while the arrest stunned the community, it also served as a testament to the persistence of law enforcement, the power of forensic advancements, and the unwavering hope of a family that never gave up searching for their lost daughter. The story of Holly Mackenzie was far from over, but for the first time in 14 years, the dark shadow of uncertainty had been lifted. The arrest was just the beginning of the reckoning, an event that would ultimately allow Natchez and Holly's family to confront the past and begin the process of healing. The arrest of Lance Whitfield sent shockwaves through Natchez. Streets that had once hummed with quiet routines were now filled with hushed conversations, lingering glances, and the collective weight of disbelief. People who walked past Whitfield for years without a second thought now saw the face of a man who had haunted their memories for over a decade. For the Mackenzies, the news was bittersweet. Relief mingled with sorrow, knowing that justice was finally within reach. But the years of unanswered questions and stolen time could never be returned. Linda Mackenzie spent hours at the sheriff's office, poring over reports, clinging to every detail that could illuminate what had happened to her daughter. Finally, she whispered one evening, sitting alone in Holly's room. The familiar scent of old books and her daughter's belongings filled the air. "Finally, we know." Her husband, James, remained stoic outwardly, but inside, a storm of emotion raged. He walked the streets near Oak Street, the route Holly had taken countless mornings before vanishing. Each step was a reminder of loss, but also of resilience. The town of Natchez, while shaken, began the slow process of collective healing. Community meetings focused on supporting families, improving neighborhood safety, and reflecting on the lessons Holly's disappearance had taught them. Parents spoke openly about fear, vigilance, and the importance of awareness, while children were reassured that the nightmare that had hung over their town for years had finally been addressed. Detectives Evelyn Carter and Carl Jennings were lauded for their persistence. They had never abandoned the case, even when leads seemed futile and evidence scarce. Their work reminded everyone that even the coldest of cases could be solved with patience, dedication, and advances in forensic science. Yet, as Natchez moved forward, the shadow of Holly's absence lingered. Memorials were held, and her story became a permanent part of the town's history. School assemblies, community newsletters, and church sermons included references to Holly, not as a cautionary tale of fear, but as a testament to hope and endurance. The arrest had closed a chapter, but opened space for reflection. Families who had felt isolated by the fear of the unknown found comfort in community solidarity. The tragedy of Holly's disappearance became a collective experience, uniting the town in vigilance and empathy. For the Mackenzies, closure came not from erasing the pain, but from understanding it. They honored Holly through quiet remembrance, lighting candles on her birthday, speaking her name in her room, and ensuring that her memory lived on in their daily lives. Her story doesn't end with her disappearance, Linda said at a community vigil. It continues with all of us who remember her, who fight for justice, who refuse to let her life be forgotten. In the end, Holly Mackenzie's story was one of endurance. It was about a family's unwavering hope, a community's support, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Though it took nearly 14 years, the answers arrived. The arrest of Lance Whitfield didn't erase the pain, but it finally allowed the Mackenzies and the town of Natchez to confront the past and begin to heal. The town learned profound truth. Even when hope seems distant, persistence, love, and vigilance can illuminate the darkest mysteries. And while Holly's absence would always be felt, her memory became a beacon, a reminder that no case is ever truly forgotten, and no victim ever disappears completely from the hearts of those who love them. Natchez would never be the same, but the community had endured. And for Holly Mackenzie, the long-awaited justice had finally arrived.